The Goat House is back with NFL trades that could actually happen and would be pretty significant. League-changing trades. Let's break it down. It sure sounds like the trade rumors with Trey Hendrickson are going to start to heat up again because earlier today he came out and said there's no communication from the Bengals right now. He wants, obviously, a raise, a contract extension. They feel like he's asking for too much, and he feels like they're lowballing him. He's also good with a trade, and the Bengals have been stubborn with that. They don't want to just give him away. They really want him back. I think he's deserving of the raise and the contract extension. He didn't get it last year. He decided, hey, I'll play. So I think it's time to give him that money. And man, even a week ago, it just felt like the Bengals were being super stubborn. They just weren't going to trade him. It just felt like he wasn't going to be on a different team. And it still could be the case. The Bengals could continue to stay stubborn. But as time goes on and it just stays the same, do the Bengals finally give in and deal him? It's a possibility. And since day one, I've been saying if he's going to get traded, the Commanders are the team to watch. I said it since day one. We've talked about, even in a recent video, other teams as well. But they make the most sense, so I use them in this video, in this scenario, because it would also be pretty significant. I mean, the Commanders may be an edge rusher away from being even more of a legit contender. The defense took a little bit of a hit this offseason, but the offense is ridiculous, right? At least on paper. But if they get a big-time edge rusher, it would be something, right? And I felt like, we knew for a fact that the Commanders were actually in on a potential Trey Hendrickson trade around free agency, but we knew the Bengals were going to be a little stubborn, and it felt like the Commanders took a back seat in free agency. Do we sign this guy when we're trying to get Trey Hendrickson? It's what it felt like was going on, and they actually did not draft an edge rusher in the draft either. And they're not afraid to make that splash move. They're not afraid to trade draft picks. They've shown that. You could argue they traded too many draft picks as it is. So can they afford to do this? They could afford it cap-wise for sure. I don't think they'd be scared to do this, right? And they could be Trey Hendrickson away from winning a Super Bowl, really. So the scenario I went with, Hendrickson going to the Commanders. We know they had interest at one point, and they could use them for sure. And the Bengals getting a 2027 second-round pick is what I decided to go with here because, value's a little tricky because a second actually seems pretty high for a guy. You have to, 30 years old. I mean, he's still playing the best football of his career, but 30 years old, needs a raise, and needs an extension. So it's hard to give up that second-round pick, but this is probably a later second-round pick. It's in 2027. And the Bengals, I feel like, simply will not accept anything less. If it's a third-round pick, you're going to need a third and a fourth and maybe a fifth, maybe two-thirds. Bengals may not do it as it is. Commanders don't have a second in 2026. They also don't have a fourth-round pick. So they actually may rather trade the 2027 second than a third this year because how limited they are in picks this upcoming 2026 draft, which we're a year away from that still. And the Bengals are, they're looking pretty good future-wise where they're not going to be able to spend a ton of money because they just dished out a ton, with this, adding a second-round pick, I should say. So I thought that trade made some sense there. But it will be tough to agree on compensation, and the Bengals are going to have to finally give in to make this happen. But that is the Trey Hendrickson trade that made the most sense. It is realistic, and it would shake things up in the league for sure. Jalen Ramsey, a trade that has to happen, whether he's going to the Rams or we talked about the Falcons. Could the Eagles be involved? Some people say the Raiders, but the one that, would really shake things up and would be eye-popping is going back to the Rams. Well, first off, because the storyline, him going back to LA, but mainly because the Rams are a legit team right now. That is a legit roster if they're healthy. That is a serious Super Bowl contender, again, as long as they're healthy. And the defense really took steps up last year. They're very well coached. They have a lot of young players, but they're pretty thin at the cornerback position, so getting a veteran in there would make some sense. They have some spending money. He is going to be a little expensive. Would the Rams prefer this if the Dolphins paid? A lot of teams would if the Dolphins pay a portion of his salary, but it's came out that the Dolphins don't want to do that, but maybe they give in and do that. Maybe they can get a better pick, but it almost sounds like they'll take the lesser pick to not pay any of a portion of his salary. So we'll see what happens there, but he's probably going to go, the compensation-wise, he'll probably go for less than what his actual talent is, just because The Dolphins are losing leverage. They don't want to pay a portion of his salary, but mainly they kind of already agreed, hey, world, we're trading Jalen Ramsey. So you don't get a lot in return when you do that. So I thought a 5th-round pick made some sense. But the Rams they're typically very careful, especially with defenders, spending money on them. And again, he's over $18 million this year, and you would have to trade a pick. So that part of me, when I say it that way, is like, would the Rams actually do this? So if the Dolphins paid a portion of the salary, then they definitely would. But it's kind of how every team is right now. Again, I mentioned the Falcons. I mentioned the Eagles could be a little sneaky. People mentioned the Raiders, and the Seahawks could be a little sneaky as well. But the Rams would be the fun one, right? This would be for several reasons. Back to LA, and they are that much more of a contender with him. So Ramsey's definitely one to watch. We all expect him to get dealt at least at some point. I actually have 2 Breece Hall scenarios because I couldn't decide on one because, well, first off, the Chicago Bears, I think, would be the most likely team maybe to make this trade for a running back because they're not afraid to make trades. We saw that in the past under Ryan Poles, and we saw it now under Ryan Poles with Ben Johnson, this offseason. So they wouldn't be afraid to do it. They badly need a running back. The rest of the roster is kind of coming together. Ben Johnson really values the position, and here's a guy that is still young, still got a lot in tank, very athletic, but he is a big-time pass catcher. So the Chicago Bears, I think, would be the team maybe more likely to trade for Breece Hall, but it's another team we're about to talk about in another scenario that the fit is just eye-popping. And I like the fit here with Ben Johnson, but the fit is eye-popping with a different team in the other conference, an AFC team. But for the Bears, yeah, for trade compensation, I went with a 3rd-round pick and DeAndre Swift. Now, the Bears would love if they acquire a running back to push out DeAndre Swift because I know the Bears started with a lot of cap space. They're a little limited, not that it's a problem. Like, they can make a trade for Breece Hall. They can acquire guys. Like, it's not an issue. But if they were to add a running back, they would prefer moving on from Swift and clearing a little bit of space there. That would make sense. So, because they don't really need him at that. They could use both, I suppose. But Ben Johnson's essentially moved on from Swift in the past with the Lions, so he could do it again. And I thought maybe a 4th-round pick with Swift since the Jets are getting a running back, but they are taking on his contract. It's not super lengthy. He can get out of it after this year. And Breece Hall is the better back, but Breece Hall is so talented. I know the downside here is he's got 1 more year left in his deal, and then you need to pay him. So is it a rental? Do you let him walk? What's the situation there? I mean, he's not like a 1,000-yard rusher, so people knock him for that. But, man, he is a phenomenal pass-catching back, and it just feels like he's just getting going. So I actually believe he's almost got to the point where maybe he's a little underrated. So I think a 3rd and DeAndre Swift. I think a 4th is just too low for the Jets to accept. But maybe they're just looking to part ways. That's why the trade chatter has kind of happened, is because it almost feels like Breece Hall's good with moving on, and it just feels like they could be looking for another back. But they didn't draft a running back, though. So that kind of says, do they keep Breece Hall? So we'll see. But this would be a fun trade that I think is somewhat realistic. The Bears upgrade at running back, which they need, and that makes them that much better, it feels like. And the Jets get a 3rd-round pick and DeAndre Swift. So they still, Braylon Allen and Swift could really, really split then, and they get that 3rd-round pick, of course. And like I said, I kind of have 2 scenarios for Breece Hall because, man, this feels like a perfect Sean Payton running back here. I know the Broncos, they have a couple backs already, and then they drafted R.J. Harvey, who kind of can be a Swiss Army knife as well. Central Florida kind of used him in different ways, some gadget plays, Wildcat. So he does feel like a Sean Payton guy as well, and he likes having kind of a split backfield, a rotation of backs, and they can do that with their current group. But number one, Breece Hall gives them a major, major upgrade, and he's not one of those backs that needs to be an every down back. You split with him. He's just the number one. So it would still work out. Him, RJ Harvey, Estime, etc. It would still make sense. And he's just such a good pass catching back, which Sean Payton loves. It could be, totally different builds, not the same running back, but it could be his Alvin Kamara, like a really good pass catching back, a guy that's not an every down guy, not a guy that's gonna take a beating, even though he's kind of built, to handle that load. So it just makes so much sense. Again, I'd say his value is at a 3rd-round pick. A 4th-rounder is just too low. I know some people would say it need to be a 4th-rounder because he's, not a 1,000-yard rusher. And yeah, I guess he does have an expiring deal. Then how much do you pay him after that? Is he demanding an extension right now? So I guess there are some obstacles there, perhaps. He's just too talented, and to me, I know I wish he can beat guys in the open field a little bit more. He doesn't really try to make people miss as much, and he can. He shows capabilities of doing that. So it's not a perfect back, but he brings so much to the table. He can play on he's not going to be an every down back, but he can play on every down in any situation, I should say. So I think a really good fit in that Broncos offense, and it elevates them that much. So I think a 4th-round pick is too cheap unless he's demanding X amount of money right now. And it just becomes obvious that the Jets don't want him anymore. I just don't think that's the case, though. So that's kind of the issue. But a guy to watch, maybe it feels a little less likely that he gets dealt now just because the Jets don't have a legit replacement, I suppose, unless they think one of those other guys down the depth chart could step up. Braylon Allen definitely could step up, but we're kind of looking for someone else there as well. But we'll see. An interesting name. This one with Mark Andrews, I was kind of back and forth between putting in this video because the video is kind of like trades that we need, trades that we would love to see in a way. And then for the Ravens' sake, I don't know if I would love this because this is a team I'm not saying it's my prediction, but I might predict them to go to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl. And if they don't have Mark Andrews, they take a hit unless they get a replacement because tight end is just so important to them, so valuable to them. And I know they have Likely, but they use both of them. And Kolar could step up, obviously. But, man, they're a little bit worse. They're still great, but they're a little bit worse without Andrews than they are with them. So they need to have a replacement lined up. But this is one that just based off the talk could be realistic. Again, going to the draft, no tight end. The Ravens don't have a key replacement right now. And Likely really isn't a replacement. There's both, you have both of them, as 2 tight end ones, in my opinion. Unless they think Kolar can replace him, then maybe. But it feels like it's a little less likely, but it's still a possibility. And it's a dream trade, I guess, for the Chargers, and just in general, a beautiful fit if Mark Andrews were to be traded. Back with Greg Roman, a team that's really going to value the tight end position. I know they brought in Conklin, brought in the rookie as well, but having Andrews in there, it gives Herbert and just this offense that much more of a boost. So the Ravens would need a 3rd-round pick back, to me, no less, in my opinion, for multiple reasons. Because, well, like I said, right now the Ravens kind of need Mark Andrews. If they're about to be a serious Super Bowl contender, and if they're without Andrews, which sounds funny because he kind of let them down in the last game, but they're still better with him, right? And if you take him away, they're still a serious contender. Little bit less of one, in my opinion, unless they have the replacement lined up or that replacement pans out better than expected. So they're going to need something decent. And another reason would be, if they keep him for this year and then let him walk, which if they don't want to sign him, I'd still recommend they do that because they need him for this year. And then they get a compensatory pick. Yes, it would be 2027, but somebody would sign him to a decent deal. They'd probably get and the Ravens usually play that compensatory game where they don't bring in a lot of signings, so then they don't cancel out those compensatory picks that they lost, right? So they would probably get a pretty decent pick for Mark Andrews, I guess, depending on the contract. So I feel like they would need a 2026 3rd-round pick. If it's a 4th, maybe they get something else, with it. If it's a 3rd, maybe something goes back to a team like the Chargers as well. But I guess the downside with the team acquiring Andrews while giving up a 3rd-round pick is he needs a new deal. Does he need a little bit of a raise now? Does he need an extension? And he might be declining a little bit. Does he have durability concerns? You could argue that, but he's just too damn talented. He's just too much value. Holds too much value to the Ravens, in my opinion. So after the draft, again, it's another one that feels a little less likely, but again, the Ravens come up with a replacement plan, maybe get a little bit closer to the time of the season. Around preseason, and something like this definitely could happen. I feel like the Chargers would be the front runner for a guy like Mark Andrews because of the obvious fit. And Kirk Cousins, this one makes a lot of sense. Of course, the Steelers could sign Aaron Rodgers at any given time. There's these weird rumors that come out, like it's pointing towards, they're probably going to end up with Rodgers, so that's definitely a possibility. But if they don't, or maybe they prefer Cousins, they don't want the hassle of Aaron Rodgers, and this is very realistic. It's just the compensation is tricky to figure out because how much do you spend in terms of draft pick? How much do you trade away for a guy that did not play well last year? He was actually playing very well early on, but that wasn't playing well, playing the worst he's ever played in his career down the stretch, got benched for a rookie. and he's coming off, he had an upper body injury during the year last year, and he had Achilles the year before, and everyone's talking about how he's like not putting weight on the same leg the Achilles came from, the same foot, on the side of the Achilles injury. So there are some concerns, there's some risks, there's some issues. People say he's too expensive. I actually disagree with that. Like, if Steelers were trading for him and he's $27.5 million cap hit for, if they're trading for him, he's starting, right? That's their starting quarterback. $27.5 million for a smart, knowledgeable, experienced starting quarterback. I think that's a pretty good price. Obviously, it's a lot of money. And maybe the Falcons pay a portion of it to get a better pick even. That's definitely a possibility as well. But, so it's a little tricky. And then the Falcons, I could see so a fourth round pick seems a little high for a guy that's going to be a backup, coming off the injuries, coming off, the last time we saw him play, he didn't play that well. So a fourth seems like a bit, but the Falcons seem to be good right now, just letting him sit, and they could even wait until, maybe they tell the Steelers, we're going to wait. Maybe a team loses a quarterback due to injury, and then they're going to be desperate, and then they'll throw a fourth round pick at us. So we'll just wait. So, and the Steelers are pretty desperate for a quarterback. So, and say Aaron Rodgers decides, I'm not going to play football. So it could end up being a fourth round pick. If the Falcons pay a portion of that salary, I definitely could see a fourth round pick, maybe even a third round pick. I also could see a fifth, but probably not if the Falcons pay a portion of that salary to help out the Steelers. I would see richer than a fifth round pick. But so we'll see what happens here. But this is one that does make a lot of sense. And no matter what you think of Kirk Cousins, if you don't think he's good or if you think he's washed because of the injuries, or maybe you think you thought he was never good, maybe you thought Minnesota made him look a little bit better. I disagree with that. I think he's always been a pretty decent quarterback. But no matter what you think of Cousins, the Steelers, with that roster, with that coaching staff, they would be it's a significant, Mason Rudolph or Will Howard, probably Rudolph week 1, but to Kirk Cousins, it's a significant difference right there. So no matter what you think of them, they get a pretty big jump. So we'll see. I want to do the same video somewhat in the near future because we got the schedule release coming out. I want to do the same video, but with a little bit more of the surprise trades that not off the wall. Like, I'm not going to go get a guy that is not going to be traded, a guy that maybe isn't super likely, but you could see it and where would they best fit, because there's always those surprise trades that happen, that people really aren't expecting, leading all the way up to the season, and we're going to try to identify those. So that'd be pretty fun. There's already some guys I have in mind that, you could see this guy getting dealt, even though it's not being talked about. So we could do kind of the similar style video, but for that. But schedule release coming up. I want to do way too early week 1 pick'ems. We did that last couple of weeks. See if I can get the other guys to join me this time around this year. So we're going to be covering all that stuff and a lot more. I want to do top 32 players at each position heading into the year. Love doing those. Want to bring those back. So, but a lot to go over before the season starts, of course. So hopefully you join us. Like, subscribe, turn notifications on. It's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.